Hey guys, James here and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, this channel is all about sharing my lifelong love of cars with you guys. Today, I have the exquisite pleasure of driving this Mk8 VW GTI. The VW GTI has long tried to be the one car that is all things to all people, and by and large, it really succeeds. In this video, I'm going to take this thing for a drive, and I'm going to tell you guys the top 5 reasons to get the GTI, and then I'm going to tell you guys the reasons not to get the GTI. And at the very end, I'm going to talk about, okay, if I were shopping, would I actually get the GTI, and what changes I would, really beg VW to make the GTI basically perfect. Let's go. The first reason to buy the GTI is that it is really fun to drive, and the word tossable is what comes to mind when I try to describe this car. The real secret sauce of the GTI is that it's small and nimble, but it's still stable. Crank it in, and this thing rotates beautifully. A little bit of torque steer on the way out. No drama. In the corners, you have so much confidence in knowing what the GTI is going to do that you can really push it a little bit more than in a lot of other cars. You only lose confidence in the GTI when you're taking a high-speed sweeper really fast, and that's when it starts to feel a little vague in the front end. But anything that's low speed or kind of medium speed, this car feels excellent. It's not a 10/10ths car. If you take it to the track, you're going to be disappointed by the way that the front end washes out. On the street, I wish there was a little bit less understeer, but man, is it really good in most conditions. As a little treat though, when you first start driving the car in the morning and the tires are cold, the back end is really loose. The back end just wants to come around, and so it's actually extremely entertaining when the tires are not yet warmed up. The brakes are also really good for having a lot of fun in the street, and the best thing about them is that there's a ton of brake feel. So the way that the pedal resists your foot as you push it really communicates to you how much brake force you're getting. The one weakness I would say in the brakes is that they're a little unpredictable. So sometimes when you push the brake pedal quickly, there seems to be this extra boost that the car applies to the brakes because it thinks that you're in an emergency situation. So I would prefer to have a more linear brake pedal, but honestly it's really easy to get used to, and I think the brake pedal feedback is the most important thing here that makes it really fun to use when you're driving in a spirited way. And of course we have to talk about the engine, right? This engine is awesome. It's such a good turbocharged engine. It's really entertaining at the low RPMs to the mid RPMs. Of course, as with virtually every turbo engine, it kind of dies out up top, but for carving through the canyons, the mid-range torque is just beautiful, and it just works perfectly for this application. Oh, it got some torque steer. Woo! Some crazy torque steer there. I would argue though that it actually makes it a little more entertaining. It doesn't actually try to rip the wheel out of your hands. It's just enough to make this thing feel a little bit alive. So overall, the driving dynamics of the GTI are just absolutely fantastic for making your commute a little bit more entertaining and for giving you that, excuse to go into the mountains every once in a while. Reason number 2 is the insanely good build quality of the GTI in most places in this cabin and on the outside. Honestly, these doors are some of the most solid feeling doors in the entire automotive industry that I can remember. And pretty much all of the surfaces in this cabin feel like there's no flex, right? When you push on them, there's basically no give. They're very, very firm. And there are just a few exceptions, like this little touch switch thing for the sunroof. It creaks when you push it, like that. But other than that, this cabin is really, really solid. And this leads me to the third reason to buy a GTI, which is that the ride quality is absurdly good for this type of vehicle. This thing is so stereotypically Germanic in the sense that everything's firm, you're not wafting over the road, but the structure of the vehicle is so solid that the car just handles all of the bumps and imperfections and cracks and potholes in the road with zero drama. It just goes whoomp, and that's it. There's no shuddering, there's no shaking, there's no secondary motions. Right now we're going over some really bumpy concrete roads, and even though this is a very short wheelbase vehicle, we don't have a whole lot of porpoising, unlike some Mercedes.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if they've lowered the car more. It's touching, but that's obviously because of the porpoising. But yeah, that's aggressive.
The fourth reason to buy a GTI is that it's insanely practical. This vehicle is 4 inches shorter in length than our CX-30, and it's a lot lower, but it actually has an equivalent amount of trunk volume. It's only off by about 0.3 cubic feet. And the interior volume for passengers is also just about the same as in our CX-30. And things get even crazier when you compare the GTI to something like a Porsche Macan. This GTI is 18 inches shorter in length than a Macan, and it's 6 inches narrower in width, and yet it has a 12% larger trunk. And the cabin is really comfortable as well. There's a lot of greenhouse, it feels really open, and of course our friends over in Europe are probably thinking, yeah, we knew that, and that's why we all drive hatchbacks. But hey, most of my viewers are American, so I thought I'd get the message out there that hatchbacks are pretty amazing. And the fifth reason to get a GTI is that it comes with 2 options for excellent transmissions. This one happens to be the DSG, which is the dual clutch transmission. VW has ironed out all of the little kinks in the operation of dual clutch transmissions. The only thing I would change about this DSG is that when you're not in sport mode, I wish it was a little bit quicker to respond to your throttle inputs, but overall it's such a good transmission, especially for a vehicle that's in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. And of course there's the manual option for those of you who want to row your own gears. The fact that the GTI comes with not just one good transmission option, but 2 really is rare in today's automotive market, and it kind of reinforces that notion that the GTI is supposed to be that car that does all things for all people. Those are the top 5 reasons that I think you should buy a GTI. Now let's talk about the reasons you might not want to. And the top reason is the fact that the infotainment and all of the buttons in this cabin are absolutely hot garbage. I posted a video recently where I discussed the fact that Mazda's infotainment and HVAC controls are unbelievably responsive and have really nice tactile feedback. And that's what contributes to this feeling of Jinba Itai in the Mazda products, which translates to kind of oneness between the driver and the vehicle. This is the opposite of that. There is no feedback, no tactile feedback until way after you've tried to push the button that you're trying to push. And the responsiveness is just not there. It's really slow to respond. So you find yourself trying to do some very simple function like turning on or turning off the heated or ventilated seats, and you're poking at the thing and you're overshooting because you're like, there's delay and there's no feedback, and it's just a horrible mess. Thank goodness there's wireless Apple CarPlay in this car. But this might be the absolute worst CarPlay integration I have ever used. It's slow, it's buggy, where stuff doesn't load frequently. And the second reason why you might want to reconsider a GTI is, unfortunately, the steering. Now, earlier in this video, I talked about all of the ways that the driving experience of the GTI is really wonderful, and it is. But the steering is kind of the weakest link. It's vague, and the way that the weight builds up in the corners feels, to me, really unnatural. It builds up a little too much as you get into a corner, to the point where it feels very odd. It gets in the way of understanding what the front wheels are doing. So I think that needs to be recalibrated. And the final reason you might hesitate about the GTI is its price. It has gotten pretty pricey compared to its main competitors, like, for example, the Civic Si or the Elantra N. In my opinion, the S and the 40th anniversary edition trim levels are pretty good value, at about $30,000 and $33,000 US each. But once you get to the SE, it's like, maybe. And then once you get to Autobahn, that is expensive. At about $40,000 for the top trim GTI, I'd probably just save up a little more and stretch to get a Golf R, because that is a different beast. All right, taking all of that into account, what are my overall thoughts on the GTI, and would I actually get one if I were looking for an all-in-one vehicle? If my budget prevented me from getting something like a Porsche Macan, then I think yes, the GTI makes a really strong case for itself as an all-in-one car. Personally, I like the GTI's German solidity and the way it moves down the road like a block of granite. The superstar here is this brilliant chassis. It makes everything better, from the ride quality to the handling. The GTI is expensive compared to its competitors, but you really can feel where that money went. It went into the engineering in the bones of this vehicle. About 8 years ago, I owned a Mark 7 e-Golf, and that was ridiculously fun. It was so much fun to just peel away from stop signs and out of corners. And if there was such thing as a Mark 8 e-Golf, I think that would 100% be my daily car. There are two changes that I would make to the GTI to basically make it perfect. And the first one is to swap out this infotainment and give us some real buttons. And number two is I really hope that VW will dial out some of that understeer. I don't think that's very likely though, because VW does have to protect the Golf R. One can dream, right? But that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, if you could hit that like button, that would be awesome. I really appreciate it. And if you're not yet subscribed, hit that button too. My name's James. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Drive safe.